Picture this. It's a cold November day in 1963. A president's motorcade whins through Dallas. Shots ring out. Within hours, the world is stunned. John F. Kennedy is dead. Decades later, we still don't know the full truth. Was it a lone gunman, a vast conspiracy, or something even darker? This is just one of countless political mysteries that history refuses to solve. Behind the grandeur of power and the shadows of thrones lie secrets, murders, disappearances, betrayals that defy explanation even today. Some were covered up. Some were buried, but none were ever truly forgotten. In this video, we're diving into 20 of the most jaw-dropping political intrigues that remain unsolved. From ancient assassinations to modern-day scandals, these are the stories of power, deception, and unanswered questions. Who killed Julius Caesar, and why did his murderers fail to save Rome? What really happened to the two young princes locked in the Tower of London? And why did a UN Secretary General's plane crash under suspicious circumstances? Each case is a labyrinth of theories, lies, and dead ends. And by the end, you'll see just how much of history is still hiding in plain sight. So stay with us, because the truth is never as simple as it seems. Now let's step back even further in time, to the blood-stained floors of the Roman Senate. It's the Ides of March 44 BC. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, arrives for what he thinks is just another meeting. But within moments, he's surrounded by senators, including men he once called friends. Daggers flash, Caesar collapses, stabbed 23 times, his last words. Even those are disputed. Some say it was a gasp, others claim he whispered, "You too, Brutus." Here's what we know for sure: the assassins, led by Brutus and Cassius, believed they were saving the Republic from tyranny. But here's the twist: they failed. Instead of restoring democracy, Rome plunged into civil war, paving the way for an empire. So what went wrong? First, the conspiracy was anything but secret. Ancient sources hint Caesar had warnings from a soothsayer's famous "Beware the Ides of March" to his wife's nightmares. Did he ignore them, or did he accept his fate? Some historians argue he knew the risks but walked into the Senate anyway, as if daring his enemies to act. Then there's the question of who really orchestrated it. Brutus and Cassius were the faces of the plot, but were they puppets? Suspicion falls on shadowy figures like Decimus Brutus, who lured Caesar to the Senate that day, or even Mark Antony, who suspiciously avoided the attack. And let's not forget the crowd's reaction. Romans initially cheered the killers until Antony's fiery speech turned the public against them. The assassination wasn't just a murder. It was a miscalculation. The conspirators thought killing one man would restore an old system. Instead, they unleashed chaos. Centuries later, we're still asking, was it idealism or naivety that drove them? And if Caesar had lived, would Rome have been better off or worse? Now, let's journey forward to 15th century England, where another mystery unfolds, one wrapped in royal blood and whispered betrayal. In the summer of 1483, two young princes vanished inside the Tower of London. Edward V, just 12 years old, and his 9-year-old brother Richard were heirs to the throne. Their uncle, Richard III, had declared them illegitimate and taken the crown for himself. Soon after, the boys were never seen again, the obvious suspect. Richard III, for centuries he's been painted as the villain. Shakespeare immortalized him as a hunchbacked killer. But here's the catch: there's no concrete proof. No bodies were officially found until two small skeletons were discovered under a staircase in the tower in the 17th century. Even then, the remains were never conclusively linked to the princes. Could someone else have wanted them dead? Enter Henry VII, who defeated Richard at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. Henry had a motive: eliminating rival claimants to secure his new Tudor dynasty. Some historians argue he framed Richard to justify his own rise to power. After all, the Tudors had every reason to smear Richard's name. painting him as a monster to legitimize their rule. Then there's the role of Tudor propaganda. Chronicles written under Henry's reign hammered home Richard's guilt, but later research suggests these accounts were heavily biased. Even the famous portrait of Richard as deformed was likely exaggerated, a way to make him seem more tyrannical. So what really happened? Did Richard order their deaths in a ruthless bid to keep the throne? Did Henry arrange it later to cover his tracks, or were the princes secretly spirited away, as some romantic legends claim? With no definitive evidence, this remains one of history's most haunting whodunits. It's a puzzle where power, politics, and prejudice blur the truth. Now, let's travel even further back in time to the ancient world, where the sudden death of one of history's greatest conquerors still sparks debate. Alexander the Great, the man who built an empire stretching from Greece to India, met his end in the year 323 before the Common Era, just 32 years old and at the height of his power. But how did he die? The answer is anything but clear. Some ancient sources claim Alexander fell victim to a sudden illness, possibly malaria or typhoid fever, after a night of heavy drinking in Babylon. Others whisper of something far more sinister, poison. Suspicion immediately fell on his inner circle, particularly his generals who stood to gain from his death. One theory points to a bitter rivalry with his top commander, Antipater, whose son Cassander later ordered the killings of Alexander's wife and son. Did Antipater or his allies slip something into the king's cup? Then there's the puzzling timeline. Alexander's decline lasted nearly 2 weeks, with symptoms that don't neatly match known diseases of the time. Modern experts have proposed everything from West Nile virus to bacterial infections, even alcohol poisoning. But the most chilling theory, a slow-acting toxin like white hellebore administered by someone who wanted him to suffer. The controversy deepens when we examine the accounts written centuries later. Roman historians like Plutarch and Arrian relied on second-hand sources, many of which were biased or lost to time. Even Alexander's final words are disputed. Did he truly leave his empire to the strongest, or was that a later invention to justify the wars that tore it apart? With no autopsy or physical evidence, Alexander's death remains shrouded in mystery. Was it the result of natural causes, a deadly conspiracy, or simply the toll of a life lived at breakneck speed? The truth may never be known, but one thing is certain. The death of Alexander the Great was as dramatic and unresolved as the life he lived, shifting our focus to a plot that nearly changed the course of English history. Let's examine the infamous Gunpowder Plot of 1605. This daring scheme to blow up Parliament and assassinate King James I has become legendary, but the truth behind it remains hotly debated. Was it really the work of Catholic radicals, or was it an elaborate setup by the government itself? At the center of the plot was Guy Fawkes, a Catholic mercenary caught guarding barrels of gunpowder beneath the House of Lords. The official story paints him as the face of a fanatical conspiracy, but historians have long questioned whether Fawkes and his co-conspirators were set up. England at the time was deeply divided along religious lines, with Protestants in power and Catholics facing harsh persecution. The government, led by Robert Cecil, King James's chief minister, had every reason to manufacture a crisis to justify cracking down further on Catholics. One of the most suspicious aspects of the plot is how easily it was uncovered. An anonymous letter warning a Catholic nobleman to stay away from Parliament on November 5th tipped off authorities, leading them straight to Fawkes. Some believe this letter was deliberately planted to expose the conspiracy before it could succeed, raising the question of whether Cecil's spies were involved from the start. Even more damning, several conspirators had ties to government informants, fueling theories that they were encouraged or even manipulated into acting. Then there's the matter of the gunpowder itself. Storing 36 barrels in a cellar directly beneath Parliament would have required inside knowledge or even inside help. Yet no high-ranking officials were ever implicated. Instead, the plot became a propaganda victory for the Protestant establishment, solidifying anti-Catholic sentiment for generations and giving rise to Bonfire Night, a celebration of the king's survival. So was the Gunpowder Plot genuine or a staged event to tighten Protestant control? The evidence leans toward a murky middle ground. While the conspirators were likely real in their intentions, their plan may have been egged on, or even orchestrated by those who stood to benefit most from their failure. Either way, the shadow of doubt over this 400-year-old intrigue still lingers, reminding us how easily fear and power can twist the truth. Now let's step into one of history's most bizarre and chilling political murders, the killing of Grigory Rasputin in 1916. This mystic healer, whose influence over Russia's royal family made him both feared and despised, met an end so grotesque it seemed ripped from a horror story. But was his death just the work of vengeful aristocrats, or did shadowy international forces have a hand in it? Rasputin's rise to power began with his uncanny ability to ease the suffering of Tsar Nicholas II's hemophiliac son, Alexei. Soon he became a trusted advisor to the Tsarina, Alexandra, infuriating Russian nobles who saw him as a corrupting force. By 1916, a group of aristocrats, led by Prince Felix Yusupov, had hatched a plan to eliminate him. What followed wasn't just an assassination, it was a spectacle of overkill. First, Yusupov invited Rasputin to his palace, luring him with the promise of meeting his beautiful wife. There they served him cakes and wine laced with enough cyanide to kill several men. Yet Rasputin showed no effects, leaving his would-be killers stunned. Next, Yusupov shot him point-blank in the chest, but Rasputin didn't die. He lurched to his feet and fled into the courtyard, where conspirators shot him 3 more times. When that still didn't work, they clubbed him viciously, bound his body, and threw him into the icy Neva River. Even then, autopsy reports suggested he might have still been alive when he hit the water, struggling to free himself before drowning. The sheer brutality of the murder has fueled wild theories. Was Rasputin truly superhuman, or was something more sinister at play? Some historians point to British intelligence, who feared Rasputin's sway over the Tsar might push Russia into a separate peace with Germany during World War I. Declassified documents hint that British agents may have been monitoring Rasputin and possibly even encouraged his elimination. Others argue the aristocrats acted alone, driven by desperation to save the monarchy from Rasputin's influence. Whatever the truth, Rasputin's death didn't save the Romanovs. Within 2 years, the Russian Revolution toppled the Tsar, and the royal family met their own grim fate. But the lingering question remains: was Rasputin's murder a desperate act of patriotism, a cold-blooded conspiracy, or something even darker? The mystery endures, as tangled and enigmatic as the man himself. From the shadowy intrigue of Rasputin's murder, we turn to another enigma, one that involves a man who seemed to vanish into thin air. The mysterious disappearance of Ambrose Bierce, the sharp-witted American writer known for his dark humor and fascination with death, remains one of history's most puzzling literary puzzles. In 1914, at the age of 71, Bierce journeyed into the chaos of the Mexican Revolution and was never seen again. Did he meet a violent end, or did he orchestrate his own vanishing act? Bierce was no ordinary writer. His most famous work, The Devil's Dictionary, was filled with biting satire, and his stories often dwelled on themes of mortality and the macabre. By 1913, he'd grown disillusioned with life in the United States, declaring he was heading to Mexico to witness Pancho Villa's revolution firsthand. His last known letter, sent from Chihuahua, ended with the cryptic line, "As to me, I leave here tomorrow for an unknown destination." Then, silence. Some believe Bierce was caught in the crossfire of the revolution. Pancho Villa's forces were notorious for their brutality, and it's possible he was executed as a spy, mistaken for an American agent. Others speculate he joined Villa's army only to die in battle, a fitting end for a man who once wrote, death is not the end. There remains the litigation over the estate, yet there's a more tantalizing theory. Bierce staged his own disappearance. He'd long been obsessed with death, even joking about writing his own epitaph. Could he have slipped away to some remote corner of Mexico or beyond, choosing to leave the world on his own terms? Some claim sightings of him in South America years later, though none were ever verified. Without a body, a confession, or any concrete evidence, Bierce's fate remains an open question. Did revolutionaries kill him? Did he walk into the wilderness, never to return? Or did he simply become one of the grim stories he so loved to write? The only certainty is that Ambrose Bierce, master of the unexpected twist, left his final chapter unfinished. Now let's shift our focus from the vanishing of Ambrose Bierce to a crime that gripped an entire nation: the kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby. In 1932, the world watched in horror as 20-month-old Charles Lindbergh Jr., son of the famous aviator, was snatched from his nursery in New Jersey. What began as a personal tragedy soon spiraled into a case filled with political shadows and unanswered questions. The crime seemed straightforward at first: a ransom note demanding $50,000, a ladder left against the house, and a desperate search that ended tragically when the child's body was found months later. Bruno Hauptmann, a German immigrant, was eventually arrested, convicted, and executed for the crime. But doubts lingered. Many believe Hauptmann was framed, a convenient scapegoat in a case that involved powerful figures and murky motives. Charles Lindbergh himself was no ordinary victim. By the 1930s, he had become deeply involved in controversial politics, including the eugenics movement, a belief in improving human heredity through selective breeding. Some suggest the kidnapping may have been retaliation for his extremist views or his growing ties to Nazi Germany. Others point to organized crime links. Rumors swirled that mobsters orchestrated the kidnapping after Lindbergh refused to pay protection money for his historic transatlantic flight. The evidence against Hauptmann was shaky. The ransom money found in his home could have been planted, and key witnesses later recanted their testimonies. Even the ladder used in the kidnapping showed signs of being constructed by someone with carpentry skills far beyond Hauptmann's abilities. Was he an innocent man caught in a web of bigger players? This case remains unsettling not just for its brutality, but for what it reveals about justice under the spotlight. In the rush to solve a crime that shocked America, did the truth get buried? The Lindbergh kidnapping isn't just a tragic mystery, it's a story about power, fear, and the dangerous intersection of crime and politics. And decades later, we still don't know for sure who was really responsible. From one unsolved mystery shrouded in personal and political turmoil, we turn to a tragedy that shook the global stage: the mysterious death of Dag Hammarskjöld. In 1961, the United Nations Secretary-General's plane crashed in what is now Zambia, killing him and 15 others. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic accident. But whispers of sabotage began almost immediately, and to this day, many believe Hammarskjöld was assassinated for his bold stance against colonialism in Africa. Hammarskjöld was no ordinary diplomat. He was deeply committed to peace, but his efforts in the Congo crisis put him at odds with powerful interests. The Congo had just gained independence from Belgium, and the chaos that followed drew in foreign powers eager to exploit its mineral wealth. Hammarskjöld worked tirelessly to stabilize the region, even supporting the removal of foreign mercenaries and corporate interests. This made him enemies, especially among those who saw Congo as a prize to be controlled. The crash itself was suspicious. Witnesses reported seeing another plane in the area, and some claimed the wreckage showed signs of gunfire. A British intelligence officer later admitted that his team had been monitoring Hammarskjöld's flight, raising questions about who else might have been tracking it. Even more startling, declassified documents revealed that the CIA and MI6 had discussed removing Hammarskjöld from office just months before his death. For decades, investigators dismissed the sabotage theories, blaming pilot error or mechanical failure. But in recent years, new evidence has emerged. A 1961 telegram from a US diplomat hinted at possible foul play, and a UN panel in 2017 concluded that the crash deserved further investigation. Yet despite these calls, the truth remains buried, much like the unanswered questions about who stood to gain from silencing one of the UN's most principled leaders. The death of Dag Hammarskjöld isn't just a Cold War relic. It's a chilling reminder of how far powerful forces might go to protect their interests and how the pursuit of justice can be delayed but never entirely forgotten. With fresh calls to reopen the case, perhaps one day we'll finally know what really happened on that fateful night in Africa. Shifting our focus from the shadows of Cold War intrigue to a scandal that rocked American democracy, we arrive at the Watergate affair. What began as a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in 1972 spiraled into a crisis that would topple a president and leave behind unanswered questions that still echo today. At the heart of the scandal was a simple but explosive question: how far up the chain of command did the conspiracy go? While Nixon's resignation in 1974 seemed to close the case, whispers persisted that the full story hadn't been told. Enter Deep Throat, the shadowy informant who guided reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein through the labyrinth of lies. For decades, his identity was a mystery, until former FBI official Mark Felt revealed himself in 2005. But even then, doubts lingered. Was Felt truly acting alone, or was he a pawn in a larger game? Some speculate he was funneling information on behalf of factions within the FBI or even rival politicians. Then there's the matter of the infamous 18.5-minute gap in Nixon's White House tapes. The missing segment, erased by his secretary, supposedly contained discussions about the cover-up. But was it just clumsy damage control or deliberate sabotage? And why did so many key figures like Nixon's campaign manager John Mitchell and White House counsel John Dean face consequences while others seemed to vanish unscathed? Watergate wasn't just about a botched burglary. It exposed a culture of secrecy and dirty tricks at the highest levels of power. Yet even after 50 years, skeptics argue that the true architects of the scandal, those who might have manipulated Nixon's paranoia for their own ends, were never held to account. Could rival factions in the government or intelligence community have exploited the chaos? Or was the scandal simply a case of arrogance unraveling under its own weight? The fall of Nixon taught the world a lesson about accountability. But the untold layers of Watergate remind us that sometimes the deepest intrigues aren't in the crimes themselves, but in the questions left deliberately unanswered. Now we turn to a case that shook the foundations of Swedish society: the daylight assassination of Prime Minister Olof Palme. On a cold February evening in 1986, as Palme walked home from a Stockholm cinema with his wife, a gunman stepped from the shadows and fired the fatal shots before vanishing into the night. What followed was one of history's most sprawling investigations, spanning decades and generating thousands of leads, yet the killer's identity remains as elusive today as it was that night. One of the most persistent theories points to South Africa's apartheid regime. Palme was a vocal critic of their racist policies, even comparing their actions to Nazi Germany. Was this political defiance his death sentence? Investigators uncovered connections between Swedish arms dealers with apartheid ties and the murder weapon, a revolver once traced to South African security forces. But the evidence never quite solidified. Then there's the Kurdish militant angle. Palme had angered Kurdish separatists by refusing asylum to their leaders while supporting Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War. Witnesses reported hearing the gunman shout in accented Swedish. Could it have been a mercenary hired for revenge, or was the answer closer to home? Swedish police initially fixated on a petty criminal named Christer Pettersson, convicted and later acquitted due to shaky evidence. Others suspect far-right extremists, noting a surge in threats against Palme for his progressive policies. The sheer volume of dead-end leads, more than 10,000, speaks to the case's chaos. Files were mishandled, witnesses contradicted each other, and critical evidence, like the murder weapon, was never conclusively matched. Even Sweden's famed efficiency buckled under the weight of the mystery. 38 years later, the Palme assassination stands as a grim testament to how political violence can defy resolution. Was it a lone gunman, a foreign conspiracy, or a homegrown enemy? For a nation that prides itself on transparency, the unanswered questions cut deep, and in that absence of truth, theories like shadows only grow longer. Now, let's step into the shadowy corridors of Cold War intrigue with the Iran-Contra Affair, a scandal that laid bare the tangled web of covert operations and political deception during the Reagan administration. At its core, this was a scheme where the United States secretly sold arms to Iran, despite an official embargo, to fund anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua, a direct violation of congressional ban. But the layers of this conspiracy run far deeper than the surface narrative. What didn't come to light? For starters, key documents vanished, and witnesses gave testimony riddled with gaps. Oliver North, the Marine lieutenant colonel at the heart of the operation, became the public face of the scandal, his cryptic answers during congressional hearings only fueling speculation. Was he a patriot following orders or a fall guy shielding higher-ups? North's memos referenced unnamed superiors, hinting at a chain of command that led straight to the Oval Office. Yet, critical records were shredded, and Reagan's famous "I don't recall" left historians questioning how much the president truly knew. Then there's Manucha Gorbanifar, the Iranian middleman who brokered the arms deals. A former spy with a reputation for deception, Gorbanifar was deemed untrustworthy by even the CIA. Yet he became the linchpin of the operation. Why was such a dubious figure entrusted with such sensitive negotiations? Some believe he was a double agent, playing both sides to his advantage, while others suspect his role was orchestrated to muddy the waters intentionally. The scandal's fallout was a masterclass in damage control. While 14 officials were indicted, most avoided serious consequences, and Reagan's legacy survived largely intact. But the lingering questions gnaw at the story's edges. Were these rogue operatives, or did they act with tacit approval from the highest levels? And what other secrets were buried beneath the official investigations? The Iran-Contra Affair remains a stark reminder of how easily covert operations can spiral beyond control, and how the full truth often stays locked in the shadows. But shifting our focus from covert Cold War operations to the tragic and highly publicized death of Princess Diana, we enter a realm where grief collides with unanswered questions. On August 31, 1997, the world was stunned when Diana, the beloved People's Princess, died in a car crash in Paris alongside her partner Dodi Fayed. What should have been a straightforward tragedy quickly spiraled into one of history's most scrutinized events, with theories ranging from tragic accident to calculated assassination. At the center of these speculations is the role of the British intelligence service MI6. Conspiracy theorists argue that Diana's growing influence and rumored plans to marry Dodi, an Egyptian businessman, posed a threat to the royal family's image. Some claim MI6 orchestrated the crash to prevent a scandal, pointing to the mysterious white Fiat Uno that allegedly collided with Diana's Mercedes before it hit the tunnel pillar. Yet, multiple investigations, including the exhaustive Operation Paget report, found no evidence of foul play, dismissing claims of tampered brakes or a staged collision. Then there's the role of Dodi's father, Mohammed Al-Fayed, who spent years insisting his son and Diana were murdered. He accused Prince Philip and the royal family of orchestrating the crash, citing Diana's fear of being assassinated in the months before her death. But official inquiries, including the British inquest in 2008, concluded that driver Henry Paul's intoxication and high-speed recklessness were the primary causes. Witnesses confirmed Paul was drunk, and the paparazzi chasing the car only exacerbated the chaos. Yet, even with these findings, doubts linger. Why were the bodyguards trained professionals unable to intervene? Why did the ambulance take so long to arrive? And why did Diana's final letter, predicting her death at the hands of a staged car accident, suddenly gain attention after the crash? The truth may never fully satisfy everyone, but the weight of official investigations leans heavily toward a tragic accident, not a conspiracy. Princess Diana's death remains a wound that hasn't fully healed, a moment where public grief and private suspicions fused into an enduring mystery. Now turning to a different kind of mystery, one that involved fear, biohazards, and a nation already on edge. Just weeks after the devastating attacks of September 11, 2001, a new terror gripped the United States. Letters laced with deadly anthrax spores began appearing in mailrooms and news offices, killing 5 people and sickening 17 others. The panic was immediate. Was this another strike by foreign terrorists or something even darker at play? The FBI's investigation eventually zeroed in on Bruce Ivins, a scientist at the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. On paper, he seemed an unlikely suspect, a respected researcher who'd even helped develop anthrax vaccines. But investigators claimed his erratic behavior, along with genetic matches between the attack spores and samples from his lab, pointed to his guilt. Before he could stand trial, Ivins took his own life in 2008, leaving behind a swirl of unanswered questions. Critics argue the case against Ivins was flimsy, built more on circumstantial evidence than irrefutable proof. No fingerprints or direct witnesses tied him to the letters, and some experts dispute whether the anthrax strain could truly be traced back to his lab alone. Conspiracy theorists suggest the attacks were a false flag orchestrated to justify the invasion of Iraq, since initial suspicion wrongly fell on Saddam Hussein. Others wonder if Ivins was a scapegoat concealing a broader plot involving state actors. Then there's the eerie timing. The letters were postmarked just days after 9/11, amplifying the nation's trauma. Was that coincidence or deliberate psychological warfare? Some speculate the attacks were meant to silence journalists since major media outlets were targeted. Yet despite years of probes, the full truth remains elusive. The anthrax letters didn't just kill innocent people. They sowed lasting distrust, leaving us to wonder, was this the work of a troubled individual or a shadowy operation hiding in plain sight? Now, shifting our focus to a chilling case of Cold War-style assassination in modern times, we come to the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko. This wasn't just a murder, it was a brazen act of political theater that played out on the streets of London in 2006. Litvinenko, a former Russian spy turned fierce critic of Vladimir Putin, met his end in a painfully slow and public manner after consuming tea laced with polonium-210. A radioactive isotope so rare it could only have come from a state-sponsored nuclear facility. The evidence in this case reads like something from a spy novel. Traces of polonium were found across London, in hotels, restaurants, even on British Airways planes, painting a clear trail back to 2 Russian operatives, Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun. Yet despite overwhelming forensic proof linking them to the crime, both men returned to Russia, where they were celebrated as heroes. Moscow denied any involvement, dismissing the accusations as anti-Russian propaganda. But the sheer sophistication of the operation, coupled with Litvinenko's explosive accusations against Putin from his deathbed, left little doubt about where the orders originated. What makes this intrigue even more unsettling is how it fits a pattern. Years later, in 2018, another ex-Russian spy, Sergei Skripal, was targeted with a military-grade nerve agent in the UK. Once again, the evidence pointed squarely at Russian intelligence, and once again, the case remains officially unresolved. These aren't isolated incidents but part of a broader tactic eliminating enemies abroad while maintaining just enough plausible deniability to avoid direct consequences. Yet the lingering question isn't just who did it, but why these cases remain in the shadows. Diplomatic tensions, geopolitical games, and the sheer difficulty of prosecuting state-sanctioned killers on foreign soil all play a role. Litvinenko's widow spent years fighting for a public inquiry, only to hear British officials hedge their language to avoid outright accusing Putin. The message is clear. In the world of political intrigue, some truths are too dangerous to fully expose. And so, like the radioactive traces left behind, these mysteries continue to glow faintly in the dark, reminding us that some crimes are never truly closed. Turning now to a scandal that sent shockwaves through the world of power and finance, we arrive at the Panama Papers. In 2016, a massive leak of documents from the law firm Mossack Fonseca exposed how the global elite hid wealth in secret offshore accounts. Presidents, celebrities, and business titans were all implicated in this sprawling web of financial secrecy. But buried in the fallout was a darker story, one of a journalist who paid the ultimate price for chasing the truth. Daphne Caruana Galizia, Malta's most fearless investigative reporter, had been exposing corruption in her country for years. Her relentless work made her a target. Just months after the Panama Papers revealed ties between Maltese politicians and offshore shell companies, Caruana Galizia was assassinated by a car bomb in 2017. The brutality of her murder sent a chilling message to journalists everywhere. The investigation that followed was riddled with irregularities. 3 men were eventually arrested, but questions lingered about who gave the order. Suspicion fell on figures close to Malta's government, including then Prime Minister Joseph Muscat's inner circle. Caruana Galizia had directly linked Muscat's associates to the Panama Papers leaks, accusing them of money laundering and kickbacks. Yet despite international outcry, the full truth remains buried beneath layers of political influence and stalled prosecutions. What makes this case especially haunting is how it fits into a larger pattern. The Panama Papers didn't just expose hidden money, they revealed a system where power protects itself. From Russia to the Middle East, those named in the leaks faced little consequence, while whistleblowers and journalists like Caruana Galizia bore the risks. Her death was a grim reminder that uncovering financial secrets can be as dangerous as exposing state crimes. Even today, the mysteries of Malta's offshore connections remain unresolved. Key witnesses have gone silent, evidence has vanished, and the trail of dark money stretches far beyond one island nation. The Panama Papers proved corruption is a global network, but Daphne Caruana Galizia's story proved how hard it is to break. Now we move to a crime that unfolded not on the streets, but within the supposed safety of a diplomatic mission: the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi. In 2018, the Saudi journalist and Washington Post columnist entered his country's consulate in Istanbul to obtain divorce paperwork. He never walked out. What followed was a chilling cover-up so inept it exposed the inner workings of a regime willing to silence critics at any cost. Turkish authorities quickly pieced together a horrifying narrative. An assassination team, linked to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, had flown in just hours before Khashoggi's arrival. Audio recordings allegedly captured the moment he was suffocated, dismembered, and disposed of by operatives. The Saudis initially denied everything, then offered shifting explanations, from a rogue operation to a botched interrogation. None held up under scrutiny. U.S. intelligence agencies concluded the killing was ordered by Mohammed bin Salman himself, but the response from Washington was muted. Despite bipartisan outrage, economic ties and arms deals with Saudi Arabia tempered official condemnation. Leaked CIA reports pointed to the Crown Prince's direct involvement, yet the White House avoided imposing personal sanctions, citing the importance of the strategic relationship. Why has accountability remained so elusive? The answer lies in the tangled web of geopolitics. Saudi Arabia's oil wealth and influence shield its leadership, while Khashoggi's dual role as both an insider and dissident made his killing a warning to others. His murder wasn't just about silencing one man, it was about demonstrating the cost of defiance to a global audience. Years later, the case remains unresolved. Some lower-level operatives were convicted in a Saudi court, but the masterminds faced no consequences. For journalists and activists, the message was clear: even on foreign soil, powerful regimes can reach dissenters. Khashoggi's death exposed the limits of international justice and the price of challenging unchecked power. But let's turn our attention to a scandal that shattered headlines and left even more questions in its wake. The death of Jeffrey Epstein in 2019 didn't just dominate the news. It became a lightning rod for conspiracy theories, political intrigue, and allegations of a cover-up at the highest levels. Officially ruled a suicide, Epstein's death in a Manhattan jail cell raised immediate red flags. How did a high-profile prisoner with potential knowledge of powerful figures die under such suspicious circumstances? The facts alone are troubling. Epstein, awaiting trial for sex trafficking charges, was supposed to be under constant surveillance. Yet guards allegedly fell asleep, cameras malfunctioned, and his cellmate was transferred just hours before his death. Forensic evidence added fuel to the fire. Independent medical experts disputed the official autopsy, pointing to injuries more consistent with strangulation than hanging. The timing was impossible to ignore. Epstein had hinted days earlier that he could name influential clients, from politicians to billionaires. Digging deeper, his connections paint an even murkier picture. Epstein wasn't just a wealthy financier. He moved in circles that included intelligence operatives, Silicon Valley elites, and even royalty. His long friendship with figures like Ghislaine Maxwell and his mysterious trips to private islands suggested a network far beyond just criminal activity. Some speculate he may have been gathering leverage blackmail material on powerful individuals. Others believe intelligence agencies used him as an asset, turning a blind eye to his crimes in exchange for information. But the biggest unresolved question remains his client list. Despite lawsuits and investigations, the full roster of those who visited Epstein's properties has never been made public. Key documents remain sealed, and witnesses have faced unusual obstacles. The suppression of this list fuels suspicions that justice was deliberately stalled to protect the rich and connected. If Epstein was silenced, who stood to benefit the most? His death didn't end the scandal. It magnified it. From congressional hearings to viral documentaries, the case continues to expose the unsettling intersection of power, secrecy, and impunity. Whether suicide or murder, one thing is clear: Epstein's story is far from over, and the truth, whatever it may be, remains just out of reach. Now, let's shift to a brazen act of political intimidation that played out in the skies. In May 2021, a routine Ryanair flight from Athens to Vilnius was suddenly diverted, not by technical issues, but by a fabricated bomb threat. Forced to land in Minsk under the escort of a Belarusian fighter jet, the real target quickly became clear: Roman Protasevich, a dissident journalist and vocal critic of Belarus's authoritarian leader, Alexander Lukashenko. This wasn't just a detour. It was an act of state-sponsored air piracy, an unprecedented hijacking of a civilian plane by a government to silence opposition. Protasevich, who ran a Telegram channel exposing regime crackdowns, was arrested immediately. His terrified on-camera confession, delivered under obvious duress, only deepened suspicions of torture. Meanwhile, Lukashenko's regime claimed the diversion was due to a Hamas-planted bomb, a claim debunked when no explosives were found and Hamas denied involvement. The global backlash was swift. The EU slapped sanctions on Belarus, banning its airlines from European airspace and targeting key sectors of its economy. The US condemned the hijacking as a shocking act, while the UN called it a clear violation of international law. But Lukashenko, long emboldened by Russian support, remained defiant. The incident laid bare his unchecked power and the lengths he'd go to crush dissent. Critically, this wasn't an isolated move. It fit a pattern. Months earlier, Lukashenko had clung to power through a rigged election, sparking mass protests met with brutal arrests and disappearances. The plane hijacking sent a chilling message. No one, not even those on foreign flights, was beyond his reach, yet the fallout raised bigger questions. How did Belarusian authorities know Protasevich's exact flight details? Was there cooperation from airline staff or other governments? And with Lukashenko facing few real consequences thanks to Putin's backing, what stops other autocrats from weaponizing air travel next? The incident remains a stark reminder of how authoritarian regimes exploit global systems, turning even the skies into tools of repression. Turning our focus to the murky waters of energy politics, let's dive into one of the most explosive mysteries of recent years: the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines. In September 2022, a series of underwater blasts ripped through these critical gas arteries linking Russia to Germany, unleashing massive methane leaks and sending shockwaves through global energy markets. At first glance, the attack seemed to sever Russia's economic lifeline to Europe amid its war in Ukraine. But who actually stood to gain? Suspicion initially fell on Moscow itself. Blowing up its own pipelines would make little sense until you consider the Kremlin's knack for false flag operations. By crippling Nord Stream, Russia could escalate energy chaos in Europe while blaming the West, tightening its grip on nations dependent on alternative gas routes it controls. Yet, with Russia already weaponizing gas supplies by cutting off flows before the explosions, some argue demolishing the pipelines was overkill. Then there's the U.S. angle. Washington had long opposed Nord Stream 2, warning it would deepen Europe's reliance on Russian energy. Just months before the sabotage, President Biden even vowed to bring an end to the pipeline if Russia invaded Ukraine. Combine that with reports of U.S. Navy exercises near the blast sites, and suddenly, theories of Western involvement gain traction. But would the U.S. risk such a brazen act against an ally's infrastructure? Ukraine, too, had motives. The pipelines bypassed its territory, depriving it of transit fees and political leverage. With Kiev fighting for survival, neutralizing Nord Stream could have been a strategic move to ensure Europe couldn't revert to Russian gas post-war. But did Ukraine have the capability to pull off such a complex, deep-sea operation? The most unsettling part, the deafening silence. Despite international investigations, no government has officially named a culprit. Sweden abruptly ended its probe, citing national security, while Germany's inquiry stalled. This geopolitical muteness hints at something darker, a consensus among powers to bury the truth, perhaps because exposing it would force uncomfortable confrontations or reveal alliances too fragile to withstand public scrutiny. What's clear is this: the Nord Stream attack wasn't just about pipelines. It was a covert battle over energy dominance where the real winners and their motives remain hidden beneath the waves. And with global tensions still simmering, the full story may stay submerged for decades to come. Shifting gears to a drama that played out like a modern-day Shakespearean tragedy, let's dissect the Wagner Group mutiny, a bizarre twist in Russia's war in Ukraine that left the world questioning who really holds the reins of power in Moscow. In June 2023, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the brash leader of the notorious Wagner mercenary group, stunned the world by turning his forces against Russia's military leadership. For 24 chaotic hours, Wagner fighters seized a southern Russian city, shot down military aircraft, and marched toward Moscow, demanding the ouster of Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the rebellion collapsed. Prigozhin called it off, claiming he wanted to avoid bloodshed. But whispers swirled that a backroom deal with the Kremlin had been struck. The real shock came 2 months later. Prigozhin's private jet plummeted from the sky north of Moscow, killing everyone on board. Russian authorities blamed a vague technical failure, but the timing reeked of retribution. Was this Vladimir Putin's revenge for the humiliating mutiny? The Russian president's icy eulogy calling Prigozhin a talented businessman with a complicated fate only fueled suspicions. Digging deeper, the mutiny exposed cracks in Putin's once ironclad rule. Prigozhin's open taunts about military incompetence and corruption struck a nerve with ordinary Russians, revealing rare public dissent. Meanwhile, Wagner's battlefield successes in Ukraine had made Prigozhin a wild card, a man with his own army, loyalties, and ambitions. His rebellion wasn't just about Shoigu, it was a power play that dared to challenge Putin's authority directly. Now, with Prigozhin gone, Wagner's future hangs in the balance. The group's African operations, a key source of Russian influence and profit, are being absorbed by the military. But the mercenaries themselves, battle-hardened and now leaderless, could morph into a destabilizing force. Will they disband, regroup under new leadership, or even defect? The mutiny and its bloody aftermath leave us with unsettling questions. Was Prigozhin a pawn in a larger Kremlin purge, or did he genuinely overplay his hand? And in a system where loyalty is the ultimate currency, what does his fate signal to other ambitious players in Putin's circle? One thing's certain, in the shadowy world of Russian power struggles, the Wagner saga is far from over. It's just waiting for its next act. From ancient coups to modern power plays, these 20 political mysteries remind us that history is rarely as straightforward as it seems. Behind every assassination, disappearance, or scandal lies a tangled web of ambition, betrayal, and veiled agendas where the official story often obscures more than it reveals. Whether it's Caesar's bloodied toga, Olof Palme's unsolved murder, or Prigozhin's doomed rebellion, these cases share one chilling thread. The deeper you dig, the murkier the truth becomes. Power thrives in shadows, and as we've seen, those who challenge it or know too much often meet grim fates. Yet the gaps in these stories invite us to question, speculate, and piece together the puzzle ourselves. So what do you think? Was Rasputin's death really the work of frantic aristocrats, or did British spies have a hand? Did Jeffrey Epstein's client list vanish with him? The comment section is your courtroom. Drop your theories, debate the evidence, and let's keep these conversations alive. History's greatest intrigues aren't just relics of the past. They're warnings, because the next political mystery is already unfolding somewhere, hidden behind press conferences and polished narratives. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember, the truth rarely ends up in the headlines. If you're hooked on these unsolved enigmas, hit that like button. It helps us dive deeper into history's dark corners. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a mystery. Until next time, keep questioning everything.